And then we can, fabulous. Right, so now we can get started. So today we're going to be talking about 5-element theory. And 5-element theory, as most people here probably know, really permeates pretty much every facet of life in China, from traditional food to traditional Chinese medicine, to religion, to the seasons, to the weather, to the calendar, and even right through to music. So even musical scales and musical instruments are each associated with one of the 5 elements. So today's lesson is really more designed to give an overview of the basic principles associated with 5-element theory. So this is very, very basic, stripped of any of those kind of associations. What is 5-element theory? What does it mean? A breakdown of the 5 elements and what their sort of core associations are. So 5-element theory actually first appeared during the spring and autumn period, so around about 770 to 476 BC. It's one of the oldest theories in Chinese history. And for anyone who doesn't know the 5 elements, we have here Huo, fire, Tu, earth, Jin, silver or metal, Shui, water, and Mu, wood. Some of you may have noticed that there is a mistake on here. This should be white because metal is associated with the color white, and this should be black because water is associated with the color black. But I think they did this more because it's a nice colorful little design. And I picked it because it looks nice. But with that out of the way, let's get into the boring diagrams on the cycles. So there are actually 2 main cycles that the elements are bound to, essentially. And these are the cycles that you may be loosely familiar with and how 5-element theory is sort of conceived. It's not kind of, although we will look at the elements in isolation, they really are designed to be looked at as a system that works together. So the first cycle you have is the generating cycle or the creation cycle. And then the second cycle you have is the overcoming cycle or the destruction cycle, although that by no means is a negative thing. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. So neither cycle is good or bad. I know destruction can kind of sound quite negative, but the general idea is that you're meant to be keeping the cycles in balance. So the creation cycle is by no means a good cycle, and the destruction cycle is by no means a bad cycle. They can be good or bad depending on whether they are in or out of balance. So the generation cycle, if you're learning Chinese, is known as sheng, or the mother-son cycle. And the overcoming or destruction cycle is known as ke, but it's sometimes referred to as the grandfather-grandson relationship. So what this means really is the mother-son cycle is that one element nurtures the other. So one acts as the mother and the other one acts as the son. So it's a generating or nurturing cycle. Whereas the overcoming or destruction cycle is more fruitful to think about it this way as a grandfather-grandson. So it's not about destroying, it's about passing on. So a grandfather passing on the mantle, so to speak, to the grandson. So the grandfather is the one diminishing, and in diminishing is passing on that energy to the grandson. So sort of similar, but slightly different kind of concepts of the movement, the flow of movement. So in the zodiac, you should avoid the element that overcomes your fixed element. So that's the only time in which you get this kind of like, I guess, idea of it being negative. So I'll talk about that a bit more after the break. But each different zodiac animal is associated with one of the 5 elements, and you should therefore avoid the element that overcomes your element. But again, I'll talk about that a bit more when we get into the zodiac signs. So again, into like complicated looking diagrams. I bet you weren't expecting this to be so kind of scientific looking. But within the 2 main cycles, they can also be split into subcycles because of course they can. It had to be super complicated. So the first 2 of these subcycles are known as inter-promoting and inter-regulating. And these are when the system is in balance. So this is when the creation cycle and the destruction cycle are both in balance. So you've got here inter-promoting, that is when the generating or creation cycle is in balance, this outward cycle here. So wood feeds the fire, you've got coming here. Fire produces earth in the form of like ash or lava, which is this one. Earth bears metal in geological processes that produce minerals. So this is quite complicated, more scientifically advanced than you might expect for a philosophy that was dreamt up more than 4,000 years ago. So yeah, you've got earth bears metal. Metal collects water in the form of water vapor that condenses on the metal, and then water nourishes wood, which is a pretty sort of simple interaction. And then as the counterpoint to that, the other subcycle, when the destruction cycle is in balance, it's called inter-regulating. So inter-promoting, i.e. they're promoting growth from one element to the other. Interregulating, they're controlling growth from one element to the other. So within interregulating, you have wood parts or stabilizes the earth. So for example, roots of trees can prevent soil erosion. That's this one here. Then the next one, earth contains or directs water. So in the form of sort of dams or riverbanks. Water then dampens or regulates fire, which is this interaction here. Fire melts or therefore refines and shapes metal, so into things like tools or weapons. And then finally, metal chops or carves wood in the form of tools again. So this is what happens when the cycle is in balance. The creation cycle becomes interpromoting and the destruction cycle becomes interregulating. But what about when things go wrong? Well, first, let's talk about all the different types of subcycles and what their Chinese names are. So you've got interpromoting, which is known as xiang xiang. So that's when the creation cycle is in balance. Interregulating, xiang ke, when the destruction cycle is in balance. And then you have actually 3 different subcycles for when things go out of balance. Weakening, xiang xie, which is the effect in a deficient or reverse generating sheng cycle. Again, that sounds very complicated. I will explain it in a moment. You've got overacting, xiangcheng, which is the effect in an excessive overcoming or an excessive ke destruction cycle. And then counteracting or xiangwu, the effect in a deficient or reverse overcoming or ke cycle. And I will go through all of these in a moment. But basically, these last 3 are when the system is in imbalance. But as you can see from this sort of diagram here, the reason why this is relevant to sort of daily life and the reason why you want these elements to be in balance is because each of these elements affects your body. So you've got, for example, fire is associated with your heart, earth with the digestion, metal with the lungs, water with the kidneys, wood with the liver. It's, again, slightly more complex than that, and I will go into that a bit more depth later. But this is why you want to be in balance, because once you get out of balance, either in weakening, overacting, or counteracting, that's when you end up having health problems. But for now, let's go through weakening. And sorry that we have this same graphic over and over again, but it's like the best one I could find that kind of helps. So weakening is the situation when the generating cycle is reversed. So it's when this outside cycle here is reversed. It means that you've got too much of one element and not enough of the other. So when there's too much of the element being generated and not enough of the element doing the generating. So the element that normally does the generating is being depleted. It is being sort of sucked of its energy. So common words associated with this cycle include things like weakening, draining, diminishing, or exhausting. The idea of exhausting the resource that is creating the next resource. So if we go through the cycle, wood depletes water, going backwards here, which means there's too many trees, for example, and not enough water, or too many plants. Water can rust metal. So if there's too much water sitting on the metal, it starts to rust. Metal can impoverish the earth. This is a very kind of like abstract way of looking at it, but things like overmining or over extraction of the earth's minerals, for example. Earth can smother fire. So if you have too much earth and not enough fire, it cancels it out. And then fire, of course, burns wood. So things like forest fires, pretty simple, that one. But then what happens if the destruction cycle goes wrong? You have 2 different subcycles, because again, this is never going to be simple. You have overacting and you have counteracting. So these are both situations when the overcoming cycle or the destruction cycle is in imbalance. With overacting, it is because there is too much of the element doing the overcoming, so it overwhelms the other element. So common words associated with this cycle are to restrict, to overwhelm, to dominate, or to destroy. So in this cycle, wood depletes the earth. So there's too much wood, it's taking over the earth. It's depletion of nutrients in the soil, for example, through over-farming or over-cultivation. Then going this way, earth obstructs water. So that's a situation in which, for example, you have over-damming. Water just completely extinguishes fire. That's kind of a simple one. Fire, instead of refining metal, actually just vaporizes the metal. And then metal over harvests wood in the form of like deforestation. Again, a slightly abstract concept because we're talking about metal as like a tool. But metal deforests or over harvests the wood. And then by contrast with counteracting, as I'm sure you've already guessed, that refers to a situation where there is not enough of the overcoming element. So the cycle is actually reversed. It means that this element that's meant to be kind of controlling and restricting the other element can't do its job properly because there's not enough of it. So common words associated with this cycle are things like to dull, to insult, bizarrely, or to harm. So if we go through it, and this is going backwards, wood dulls metal. So if there's too much wood, you're kind of chopping away with your axe is going to get dulled over time, and you need to, I guess, sharpen it, but that's the idea. Metal can de-energize fire, so metal can actually conduct the heat away. Fire evaporates the water. This is one of the most important interactions within traditional Chinese medicine. So although all 5 elements play a role in traditional Chinese medicine, the interaction between water and fire is very important. The way I was sort of had it described to me was your body is like a pot of water that's being boiled by a fire. So if you have too much fire, the water boils off. But if you have too much water, it's never going to simmer properly because you can't get enough fire to kind of get it going. So that's a really important interaction if you are interested in traditional Chinese medicine. Then after that, water muddies or destabilizes the earth if there's too much of it. And then earth rots the wood in the form of like overpiling soil, which can then rot the wood itself. So I don't really know how to do this transition. It's been a while since I've done this seminar, but this feels very disjointed now. But for now, we're going to move into the first video of today. So now, if you could stop the recording and I'll bring it up. We're going to watch 2, give them a cornetto each. So to get back into actual 5-element theory and not just, again, a diagram, I'm sure you're all really excited about that. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the seminar, almost everything has an association with an element within 5-element theory, including things as far-fetched as musical chords and planets. But these on this sort of slide here are probably the most relevant for everyday life. So these are particularly important for things like they're invaluable within traditional Chinese medicine. Almost all of traditional Chinese medicine is structured around this, but also really important for food and food therapy, things like time and the Chinese calendar, everyday life, and even things like geography and the placement, geomancy, the placement of buildings, all that fun stuff. So the cardinal directions here also play a role within feng shui, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later when it comes to talking about the zodiac. But if we go through all of the different associations, so for wood, you have what are called the yin and the yang organs. So the sort of wet organ and the hot organ. The yin organ for wood is the liver, and the yang organ is the gallbladder. The sensory organ is the eyes. It's associated with a taste, which is sour. So these are the traditional tastes of China. You may notice that one of them is missing. I'll explain why in a second. Wood is associated with spring. So it's a time of growth, a time of sort of breaking out. And therefore, within life, it's associated with early childhood. So this concept of rapid growth. Its color is green, as to be expected, and its direction is east. Then you have fire, which is associated with the heart as its yin organ and the small intestine as its yang organ. The sensory organ is the tongue, but you may be surprised to see that it's associated with a bitter flavor and not spicy. Now, that's mainly because chilies didn't actually come to China until around about the 18th century when they were brought over by Portuguese sailors from South America, which means that spiciness as a flavor wasn't really recognized until years later within Chinese history. Hence why bitter is often used as a sort of association with fire because of the strength of flavor and the kind of slight unpleasantness of it. But now, more often, people will associate fire with spiciness and spicy food. Then the season it's associated with is summer, which is a time of sort of gradual growth. Also within life, pre-puberty. The color is red and the cardinal direction is south. Then within earth, you have the spleen or the pancreas is the yin organ. The yang organ is the stomach. The sensory organ is the mouth. So what's the difference between these two? Well, the tongue, the idea behind the tongue is that it's used for tasting, whereas the idea behind the mouth is it's the touch organ, bizarrely. So you touch with your mouth, you taste with your tongue. And the mouth actually does have quite a lot of like nerve endings, like your lips. So yeah, it's more of the touch sense as opposed to the taste sense. The taste is sweetness. The season, rather interestingly, because we don't have 5 seasons, is transitional. So the idea behind Earth is that because it's the most stable of the 5 elements, it facilitates the transition between them. So between all of these different seasons, there's a little bit of Earth that helps things flow smoothly. And therefore it's associated with adolescence. So this idea of this great period of change, but sort of more stable change. I mean, I was a teenager once, it's not that stable, but stable enough. The color is yellow, and you may notice that yellow plays a really core role within Chinese culture. That's because Chinese people believe they were physically made from the earth. So the color yellow is therefore heavily associated with their national identity. And then the cardinal direction, not really a direction, earth is associated with the center, and again, stability. With metal, the yin organ is the lungs, the yang organ is the large intestine, the sensory organ is the nose, so the concept of smelling. The taste is pungent or umami flavor. So it tends to be sort of like very strong flavors, like stinky tofu is a pungent food, for example. The season is autumn. I'll talk about why that is in a moment. And therefore, in life, it's adulthood, this idea of reflecting back on life. The color is white, and then the cardinal direction is west. And then finally, water, no surprises here. Kidneys and bladder are associated with water. The sensory organ is hearing, so ears. The taste is salty. The season is winter, so a great time of reflection, but also a time of coming to an end. Or in this instance, rather interestingly, also conception, so old age and conception, the beginning and end of a cycle. The color is black, not blue, as most people would expect, and the cardinal direction is north. As an interesting side note, one of my favorite associations with water, if you go to the Forbidden City, you may notice that every roof within the Forbidden City is yellow, therefore associated with royalty, except for two. You've got the library, which has a black roof, and you have the Prince's Palace, which has a green roof. So the idea behind it is that the library has a black roof because it's therefore protected from fire, since the roof is a water roof. And the idea behind the Prince's Palace is that his element is his roof being green is associated with wood and therefore thriving and good growth. So look out for that if you ever end up in the Forbidden City. But for now, we're going to take our 5-minute break. So let me just double check. Oh, and now if you could turn around. Perfect. And let's get back into it. So now I'm going to talk a bit more in more depth about each of the individual elements, but also relate it to you and how you can bring 5-element theory into your life. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the zodiac, Chinese zodiac, and your Chinese zodiac animal. What some people may not know is that you each have a fixed element based off of your zodiac sign. So all elements exist within your body, and they should all be within balance, but you do also have this fixed element that you resonate with because it's considered to be the most auspicious for your zodiac sign. And then on top of that, if you came to the seminar on the Chinese zodiac, you'll also know that each year has its own element, which moves in a 5-year cycle. And when you combine that with the zodiac cycle, it creates a 60-year cycle. So for example, I'm a metal horse, which means that I'm slightly different from other horses because I have more features associated with metal, for example. Whereas you could be a fire monkey, you could be an earth pig, you could be a bunch of things. So look that up. It's a lot of fun. But for now, let's go through the fixed elements for each sign. So if you're a tiger or a rabbit, your auspicious sign is wood. If you're a snake or a horse like me, your auspicious sign is fire. Oxes, dragons, sheep, and dogs should look out for earth. That's your sign. Monkeys and roosters should look out for metal. And then pigs and rats, it's water. So then why is this important? Well, it actually plays a major role within feng shui theory. So the idea of placing objects in auspicious locations. Not so much objects, generally speaking, we're talking about buildings. But to enhance your luck, you should find out the direction and color of your fixed sign and then try to align your lifestyle with it. So for example, if you are a tiger, your fixed sign is wood. So your lucky direction is in the east and your lucky color is green. So for example, and this sounds a bit trite, but it's true. Well, not true, but it's according to 5-element theory. If you keep a green plant in the east of your house, it could bring you good luck. Now, since water generates wood, putting something associated with water in the east, such as a pond, can also give you a bit of a boost as well. And it can't hurt. I mean, it looks nice. Now, conversely, you should avoid putting anything associated with metal or fire in the east, because metal overcomes wood and fire can consume it. So they both interact negatively within that cycle with your fixed element. So let's go in depth about your particular elements, and you can see which one is your fixed element. So each element is associated with a mythological creature, which is also heavily tied to the cardinal direction of that element. So in the case of wood, the direction is the east, and the creature is known as the azure dragon or Qinglong. Now, this word here, Qing, I talk about it a lot in different seminars. It kind of resists translation. It's a color that doesn't actually exist in English, technically. So some people translate it as azure, but it's not really, and it's also not cyan, and it's also not turquoise, I've been told several times. It's either a greenish blue or a bluish green. But sometimes he's depicted, so this particular dragon, you can see he is depicted as green, sometimes he's blue, sometimes he's somewhere between those two things. So yeah, just take it on the chin, I guess. That this particular word, qing, doesn't really translate well into English. But yeah, greenish blue or bluish green, depending on how whoever is talking about it feels, essentially. So in terms of wood, wood has a number of positive attributes associated with it, including flexibility, strength, warmth, generosity, cooperation, idealism, outgoingness, optimism, patience, and curiosity. So it can really kind of be distilled into the concept of always seeking new ways to grow and expand. This idea of growing out, blossoming, and thriving. Wood is particularly important within Taoism and within Taoist thought because it's thought to represent strength and flexibility thanks to its association with bamboo. So for anyone who knows a lot about bamboo or just some, I don't know why anyone would know a lot about bamboo. I do, I guess. I like bamboo. Bamboo has a huge amount of tensile strength. So it means it's very flexible, but it doesn't break very often. And it is an incredibly strong substance to use if you use it as a building material. So that's why Taoists are obsessed with bamboo because of that, this idea of strength within flexibility. And that's what wood represents as well. Hence why wood is associated with flexibility and strength at the same time. So the central concept of wood is that it heralds new life and growth. So its positive attributes largely revolve around concepts of nurturing and expanding, either yourself or other people. But the negative emotion associated with wood is anger, which may seem a little bit kind of odd. But that's because when there is an obstacle to growth and self-expression, frustration will build up into anger and then rage. So it's this idea that if your growth is stunted in some way, you then become frustrated and then you become angry. So those associated with wood will be quicker to anger when their growth is stifled. That's the theory. Then after wood, you have fire or huo. So fire is associated with the south and therefore a lesser known creature, not a phoenix, which I often get confused with, but a thing called the vermilion bird or zhu que. So zhu means cinnabar and que means bird, but it's more often associated with ma que, the sparrow. So really it's kind of just like a red sparrow, but it's often represented looking a bit more like a phoenix, but it is not a phoenix. Very important distinction. Not, I even wrote in giant letters in my book, not a phoenix. So that's important. The phoenix in China is known as feng huang, which we spoke about in our seminar a bit further back about mythological creatures. So positive attributes associated with fire are things like dynamism, strength, persistence, enthusiasm, creativity, joy, power, bravery. And in essence, it can provide great warmth, but it can also burn. So fire is associated with prosperity and explosive expansion, which means it has a ton of positive attributes, but also a ton of negative attributes attached to it. It's one of the most conflicted and controversial of the elements. So when its abundant energy is channeled positively, it manifests as all of these positive attributes here. But the counterpoint to that is when it is not channeled properly, it can burn and injure just as much as it can help, which is what leads to many negative attributes, things like hate, restlessness, aggression, impulsiveness, and impatience. So unlike the other elements, fire is really, it has many more positive associations, but also many more negative associations. Things like energy running rampant or running rampant in the wrong directions. So this is what happens when it's channeled correctly and when that energy is channeled incorrectly. Restlessness, particularly impatience, and aggression or violence. Now, coming on to probably one of the most important of the five elements, really because it's associated heavily with the Chinese people, earth. So earth is placed at the center and is associated with a mythological creature known as the yellow dragon or Huang Long, Huang meaning yellow, Long meaning dragon. Arguably the most important mythical creature in the Chinese canon. So the yellow dragon is the zoomorphic incarnation, that's a very fancy word, of the yellow emperor, who is considered to be one of the primeval ancestors of the Chinese people and the greatest ruler in Chinese history. So you may have also noticed that a lot of depictions of Chinese emperors show them wearing a special gown known as the Gunlong Pao, or the dragon robe, which would be embroidered with images of the yellow dragon, so therefore images of this zoomorphic interpretation of the greatest ruler in Chinese history. So Earth is perhaps the most significant of the five elements, since humans were believed to have been actually created from the yellow Earth in the Chinese origin of man story. So as an element, Earth is defined by its capacity to stabilize and to bring harmony due to its rootedness in the soil itself. So that's why it's associated with attributes like empathy, patience, thoughtfulness, hard work, practicality, ambition, and responsibility, or in a nutshell, the capacity to bring harmony and stability. But due to the constant desire for stability, Earth is also phobic to change, which is what leads to the two negative attributes of anxiety and stubbornness. So, anxiety when things do change, and stubbornness resisting change. So, Earth is seen as a transitional element. You may think, wait a second, earlier she said that it's the transitional element. The idea is that it's meant to facilitate harmony or facilitate stable change. What Earth doesn't like is spontaneous change. And that's where you get these negative attributes of anxiety or stubbornness, resisting spontaneous change or getting anxious about it. Then, second to last, we have metal. So metal is connected to the West and is therefore associated with a mythological creature known as the white tiger, or the Bai Hu. Bai meaning white, Hu meaning tiger. So the painting here, for anyone who's curious, is by an artist named Yang Shanshun. God, terrible pronunciation today. I just think it's really pretty looking. You may also notice that here, Wang is written on his head, which means king, because the tiger is the king of beasts. So within Chinese culture, as I said, the tiger is believed to be the king of beasts. So almost every single portrayal of the tiger within paintings will have this, usually more pronounced than this, but 3 lines here, and then a line going through them, which is the Chinese character for Wang, or king. So according to legend, a tiger's tail will turn white after it turns 500 years old. So the white tiger is a beast of kind of mythical age. If it's 500 years for the tail to go white, imagine how long it's meant to be for your entire body. So it's believed that the white tiger would only appear if the emperor governed with absolute virtue, or if there was peace throughout the world. So it's a very symbolic animal. Within 5-element theory, metal is defined by its rigid strength and a long life full of experience. So it's been refined over time. As it is associated with adulthood, it also has connotations of tempered metal. So you as a human being have been tempered by the experiences that you've had, and you've become this refined product, this tool or this weapon, whatever you fancy yourself as. So therefore, the positive attributes are things like firmness, rigidity, strength, persistence, determination, ambition, self-reliance, wisdom, and sort of culminating in years of cultivation and experience. So the culmination of years of experience, that's what metal is represented as. Since metal is also linked to autumn and the end of the life cycle, it is also connected with grief and the concept of letting go. So an imbalance of metal means you are unwilling to let go. So your feelings of grief are much stronger. So really this idea is that people who get overcome by grief or struggle to let go of things, that's where metal comes in, an overbalance of metal. But also people associated with metal tend to be overly controlling, overbearing, and set in their ways because of this concept of them being wise, of having all of this experience, and therefore thinking that they know better. So that's metal in a nutshell. Apologies if I've offended anyone who is associated with metal. I'm associated with metal, so I've offended myself. And then finally, last but not least, we have water. Probably this, I guess the interplay of fire and water is one of the most important. So water is linked to the north and to a very strange creature known as the black tortoise, or xuan wu. So xuan doesn't actually mean black, it means dark, and it's associated with like dark knowledge. And then wu actually means martial arts. It's a sort of very violent term. But in English, it's usually referred to as the black tortoise. Xuan wu is also a deity within Chinese tradition, who's this sort of very kind of dark, interesting cosmological character. It's sometimes called the black turtle as well, but it is almost always depicted as a dragon tortoise, so this tortoise with this sort of long neck, with a snake intertwined with its body. So his Chinese name is actually Black Warrior, as I said, or sort of black martial artist, and he has the same name as this Taoist deity. Within Chinese culture, the tortoise and the serpent have historically served as symbols of longevity. So hence why they're associated with water. This particular creature is associated with water because water is associated with the end of the life cycle. So ideally, you don't want it to end, essentially. So water is defined as a substance that can be both fluid and weak, but also incredibly powerful and destructive. So that's why it's associated with things like stillness, intelligence, wisdom, flexibility, abundance, pliancy, and again, if you condense it down, a source of great power that requires proper direction. So very similar to fire, but fire is explosive power, whereas water is much more like passive power. So its fluid nature means it can lead to indecisiveness. stress, which in turn can result in anxiety and fear. So it is the fear of not being good enough and also the fear of death. So remember, water comes at the end of the life cycle. And although it is associated with longevity, it's also associated with the unfortunate and final end. So with all that out of the way, I hope you've all enjoyed this seminar, and I hope you've learned a little bit more perhaps about yourself and about your elements. But for now, let's move into our class discussion. And if anyone has to sort of jump out or have gone over time, please do feel free to jump out. And if not, if you could stop the recording. But I want to